Chapter 7. As I walked down the sidewalk of Avenue A, I trod on a diamond plate steel cellar hatchway. One hinge was broken and it sagged low beneath my weight, reminding me like I needed it, not to trust the ground beneath my feet. I stopped over at the cafe first. It was directly across from Tompkins Square Park and located between a laundromat and a retro 70s antique shop. In front, a short and stocky black-haired man in kitchen whites was hosing down the pavement. He looked Venezuelan, with dark, bluntly chiseled features. Over the door, cemented into the arch, were letters in mosaic, bits of broken crockery, marbles, and mirror shards, spelling out .com Cafe. Inside, it was a furnished cave lit by table lamps and ruby glass ceiling fixtures. All the seats were torn and sagging. All random mismatched armchairs and sofas and vinyl kitchen chairs clustered around two Formica tables. Dark computer monitors sat in each corner of the room, and two were on the bar where a young woman stood scooping coffee grounds and shoveling them into a filter. There was a white phone beside her. I looked around for the payphone and spotted it back by the restroom doors. No one else was inside. I asked the woman if they were even open yet. She blinked at me a few times, then, borderline aggravated, said, "Brewing the pots." "I'll wait." I flipped through the Weekly Cause, one of the free papers stacked on the floor. The angry letter from the editor, Declan Poole, accused the city of a secret policy of misclassifying violent crimes against the homeless. To pad the recent record-low crime rate and increase the city's appeal to outside money, as well as further his honor's political ambitions, the city's homeless now die exclusively of natural causes. Logic being, it's dangerous living on the street, so what's more natural than that they should lose their lives? The coffee made, I got a large dark blend and a blueberry muffin. I sat down in a chair by the barred front window, sipping my coffee and eating pinches of muffin. It was good to have food in me. My perspective mellowed some, and things began to seem less bleak. My desperation grew quiet again. I lit up a cigarette and gazed out at the high canopy of green leaves over the park. 3 chunky schoolgirls giggled by in untucked white shirts and pleated sky blue culottes. Moving in the other direction, a bald black woman pushed a stack of amplifiers on a dolly, its casters grinding grit. A heavy-faced old man with steel stubble and yellow-white hair shambled by, complaining to himself in Russian, bits of foam forming on his cracked lips. I finished my coffee and wiped my mouth with a napkin. I went across the street to Tompkins Square Park. The park was closed during the night and reopened at 6 a.m. when the dead, tired kids and the bums came looking for a soft patch of earth to lay a sheet of plastic or a bedroll on and finally catch some Z's. I walked around the favorite spots under the trees, sheltered from the sun, and looked over every lump, looking for a lump that looked like Gloria's. No such luck. The sleeper's drab clothes and hunched figures made identification impossible. For all I knew, she was there, hiding in plain sight amid her society of mushrooms. Theodore Teddy Wiley's address was only a few blocks north and east. He hadn't answered when I called, but maybe he wasn't answering his phone. Supposedly, Gloria was on the outs with him, but maybe that had changed overnight now that she was in trouble. Only one way I could think of to find out. I walked up Avenue A, then cut east on 11th. The street numbers were in the 500s, another block to go. Along the way, I stopped at several buildings where I saw stacks of takeout menus and flyers in the entryways around the stoop. I collected them by the handful, a variety of throwaway advertising, free delivery of pizza, burritos, curry, and chow mein. By the time I reached the end of the block, I had an instant disguise. Now I was a guy there to drop them off. I crossed Avenue B and began stopping at every door on the odd side of the street and leaving behind menus as I worked toward number 617. A precaution in case anyone was looking. And in New York City, someone always is. Sitting at their window, peeking out, the aged, the bored, the ill, and the clinically introverted peeking from behind drawn blinds. You never know when you're being watched. Hell, my bread and butter is observing people without their knowing it, so I can be excused a little paranoia. The building at 617 seemed to tilt out above the sidewalk, its tin roof facade sticking up like a pompadour crusty with peeling brown paint. A 5-story brick building, a story higher than those on either side. At several windows hung unpainted flower boxes growing only dry yellow stalks. I opened the gate, its spring twanging eerily, and climbed the steep steps to the glass and metal door, jumping a little when the gate crashed closed behind me. I ran my hand over the panel of numbered buzzers as if trying to find the right one, but I didn't push any, least of all T. Wiley, number 9. The old dodge of getting into a building by ringing all the bells is good for the movies and even works in real life too. The problem is all the sleeping dogs you wake, literal and not, and the darkened peepholes you have to pass on the way in. I didn't ring anyone, just seemed to, resting my hand on the door handle as if I was waiting to be buzzed in. Through the wire mesh reinforced glass, I saw no one in the entryway or stairwell. I planted my right heel about an inch from the door, then stepped down, pushing my shoe up against it, bending back the toe. It wedged a crack about a quarter inch at the bottom. The latch strained against its socket. I took a deep breath, then coughed and hit the metal door frame hard and fast with my shoulder. The latch bolt popped out. The door swung open, just the way the real takeout menu guys do it. The lock clicked shut behind me, none the worse for wear. Not so my shoulder. It was cooler and darker inside, the warped linoleum floor littered with cigarettes, junk mail, and a shriveled mouse on a glue trap. A TV filtered through a door, muffled sounds of an afternoon talk show blaring the jeers of a studio audience sitting in abject judgment. I stared up the stairs, the steps springing disconcertingly. There were spots worn away like the holes in old shoes. I grabbed the loose bracketed handrail. It was like shaking a cane in the air. The upper landing's lights were out. I pocketed my shades and read the door numbers by a silvery glow from the skylight 4 floors above. In the gloom, the tilt of the floor was exaggerated, and for balance I groped my hand along the wall, its scaly surface dotted with old chewed gum. Someone was simmering chicken and onions somewhere in the building. Apartment 9 was on the 4th floor, rear, the only door at the end of the hall. Approaching it, I left behind what little light there was. To adjust, I closed my eyes and walked a few steps blind. My foot kicked an empty bottle and sent it spinning across the floor. It ended with a chunk against the door. My eyes opened and I saw a pinpoint of light directly ahead, the apartment's peephole. I watched for the dot to go out as someone came to the door. It didn't. No one looked out or passed in front of the light. I moved forward invisibly until my outstretched hand found the door's surface. My knuckles rapped twice. Still no movement inside. My eye up to the peephole, I made out a tiny upside-down and concave image of what lay beyond. The light was formed from an uncurtained window. I knocked harder, rattled the knob, and the door cracked open, a sliver of daylight shooting out into the hall. An overpowering odor leaked out. Instinctively, I shut my nose and mouth against it, but it built up instantly at the back of my throat as a noxious aftertaste. I opened the door wider with my foot, and the smell oozed out and bathed my face in a thick, sour wave, warmly worming into my hair, soaking through my clothes and onto my skin, my pores tasting it. My throat contracted, trying to bar it from my lungs, but it was already in me. I gagged and savored its corruption more profoundly. It was the smell of decay that attracts dogs in the wild and other animals whose nature it is to dig up old kills. I stepped in and closed the door behind me. I had to get out of there, but I'd only just arrived. I turned and locked the door for privacy. I had my choice of 2 deadbolts, a bolt below the doorknob, and a bar that fit into the slots on either side, like a prison cell lockup. Tucking my hand into my sleeve, I locked one of the deadbolts. I breathed through my teeth, but it didn't help. The trick is not to focus on the fact that you're breathing the gases of rotting skin and human meat. My stomach contents made a break for it, but I squelched the uprising. Icy sweat welled up in fat pimples on my back. I really had to get out of here. Soon. The apartment was a one-room studio. I was in the kitchenette next to the stove and a sink full of plates. I opened the cabinet underneath and found a near-empty bottle of Windex, unscrewed the nozzle, and poured its contents over my sleeve. The ammonia helped cut the awful air. I entered the room, my arm across my face like Bela Lugosi. On the floor, the opposite side of a square kitchen table covered in coffee cups and newspapers, lay the toes-up body of a barefooted man. He was dressed in blue jeans and a t-shirt and had something like a half-inflated orange beach ball completely covering his head and neck. I moved closer, propelled by a weird fascination. It was a red and orange plastic bag from Tower Records, secured about his throat by a thin black electrical cord tied in 3 square knots. The plug was a solid black cube, an AC adapter wall wart, draped over his left shoulder. The other end's prong was over his right shoulder. I concentrated on the knots as a way to avoid seeing the body, untying them in my mind. The head was backed up to a chair, so whoever had tied the cord had straddled the man's chest. The knots were tied the way I would have tied them, right-handed. The bag had suffocated him, plastic forming a vacuum seal around his nose and mouth and eyes. But ineluctable time had passed. Bacteria, dissolving his tissue, had inflated the bag to the limp shape of a jack-o'-lantern in mid-July. The left side was caved in, stuck with something like tar to the hair and raw scalp on the inside. Bile erupted in me. I couldn't see a bathroom door, but the one window in the room was straight ahead. I hopped over the body, rushing to get at it. My fingers feeling for the latch. It was already undone. I threw it open and stuck my head out, but the window didn't stay. It came rushing back down on me like a guillotine blade. I forgot about being sick. Recovering, I held the window open with my bare hands and took a wonderful gulp of unfettered outside air. I let the cool metal frame soothe down the back of my neck as I faced out over a courtyard overrun by weeds and rusted appliances. Across it stood another apartment building, every rear window bricked up by cinder blocks. I looked around the room for something to prop the window open with. I saw at the dead man's black-heeled bare feet a 2-foot-long chunk of pine 2x4 that looked cut just for that purpose. I walked over but stopped short of picking it up. Flakes of dark, dried blood were on one edge. Panic rushed me back to the window, started me wiping it with my Windex damp sleeve, even places I hadn't touched, destroying evidence while creating new evidence of my very own, like a rank amateur. I forced myself to calm down, to stop, to look around, to see. The custard yellow walls were stark naked. A dusty 60-watt bulb and a smoke detector hung from the cracked plaster ceiling, concentrically ringed by brown water stains. The body was on a tattered oriental. A thin black stain trailed from it across the uneven floorboards to a corner of the room where a turned-over Coke can sat glued in its own syrup. A brown-black cola stain was also down the front of the man's t-shirt. The swollen flesh of his love handles peeked out eggplant purple against the floorboards. A metal chain was attached to a belt loop, linking up with a ring of keys in his right front pocket. His wallet was crammed in his right rear. but I couldn't get at it without moving him. 5 feet 8 or 9, mid-20s or early 30s, hard to judge without taking the bag off his head, and I was not taking the bag off his head. Heavy set and beefy, but that could have been the gases bloating him. On his right arm, from wrist to elbow, every inch of skin was covered in the sleeve of tattoos, an intricate jigsaw puzzle design of interlocking lizards sharing mutual tongues and tails. Around his left forearm was a gauze bandage held in place by white cloth tape. A small, sharp cut on the back of his hand where the bandage ended had a familiar, jagged shape, a tooth mark, but not human. I reached down and pinched a corner of the tape with my finger and peeled it back, taking some dark hair away with the bandage. The arm rose freely, no more rigor mortis, and I had to hold him down with my foot. Lifting the bandage unleashed a vapor of decay. I had to squint against it. A line of deep rips in the flesh, bleeding milky pink pus was unmistakably teeth marks, a dog's and recent. I almost recognized the smile. It had ripped through another intricate pattern of tattooed lizards on the left forearm. I reapplied the tape. The rest of the room was 2 squat green and gold upholstered armchairs set before a small round coffee table piled with cheeseburger wrappers, dirty glasses, and 2 overflowing ashtrays. All the filters were the same, Marlboro, and mixed in were several fat, greasy marijuana roaches. Some of that might have settled my stomach just then. I was enough trouble already. The bed was a mattress on the floor. 5 lumpy pillows in dingy vanilla pillowcases and wilted flower-patterned sheets. At the foot were a stereo and a CD player, both switched on, their green readouts glowing silently. Closer to the body was a plain walnut desk with 2 bottom drawers missing. The telephone was on top. The thing to do now was call the police and report it. And when they asked me why I was there in the first place, I'd say, what would I say? Looking for the young woman who stole my watch. Fine, sir. No need to talk to you further, sir. Have a nice day, sir. Nah. They'd want it backwards, in triplicate, spelled phonetically, and I wasn't sure enough of my own innocent involvement to contrive answers that would convince trained skeptics. I did not call the police. Next to the phone was an answering machine, its electrical cord missing. I lifted its lid. The spindles where a cassette should have been were empty. Negative space. Using a pen, I opened the top drawer of the desk. It was crammed with canceled checks, ATM receipts, and overdue credit card bills. Not that made him a bad person in my book. Pay stubs made out to Ted Wiley, position staff. Gave me his social security number, the first 3 numbers, 643, and the name of his last employer. Average take-home had been $225 a week. I took one of the stubs and the most recent phone bill and stuffed them in a pocket. I looked in other drawers and found curled photos of unknown people on Sunday Sandy environs, matchbooks, loose AA batteries, a camera, a collection of lighters, and a selection of drugs, a plastic baggie of skunk-smelly red-threaded pot, a pellet capsule containing off-white crystals, and 3 yellow micro-mini zipper-lock baggies as big as a baby's first tooth, full of white powder and imprinted with a tiny blue emblem of a rhinoceros horn. Robbery as a motive was looking thin. I picked up the camera, a heavy old Minolta with a chipped lens, 9 exposures advanced if any film was inside. Working under my sweatshirt, I pushed the release and rewound the crank, feeling something take. I opened the back and popped out a roll of film, ASA 1000, 24 exposures, and put it in my pocket. I had to leave now. Nothing really rushing me but the corpse's inexhaustible patience. I went to the door, checked out the peephole, an empty patch of lighted banister and dark shadows all around. I unlocked the deadbolt, using its knob to pull the door open a crack, then turned for one last look. He was just some faceless guy, a few years younger than me, dead in his bare feet with a ridiculous bag over his head. Most likely he was Ted Wiley, but still a stranger to me. I felt undiminished by his death. But before I left, I made a sign of the cross, nervously crossing the T twice, on the off chance the gesture had mattered to him once. Meeting no one going out the gloomy stairs was like winning the lotto. I needed a cigarette, quite possibly 2 or 3 smoked in hyper succession. When I got out the front door, I looked up and down the street. 2 grizzled Latino men were drinking golden beer from a quart bottle on the front stoop 2 doors down. I headed away from them, farther east. I don't know if they paid any attention to me, but at the next few buildings I came to, I dropped off the rest of my takeout menus. At the corner of Avenue D, I lit up a cigarette, sucking back the match sulfur along with the smoke and burning tobacco, scouring at the awful stench in my lungs. I walked north up Avenue D as fast as I could without actually looking at it. At 14th Street, I caught a cab coming off the FDR and had the driver take me home. He didn't mind my smoking in his cab. He was smoking himself, a cigar. I'm not an aficionado, but it smelled excellent, more fragrant than the freshest flower, and the distance we put behind us was softer than a feather bed.